about 2 cubic metres of gum.
So where do you get the tea tree from?
A farm out Milton Way.
I think we're live. That was an exciting line to come into. Where do you get the tea tree from?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Graham Flett's farm up Circle Hill.
Malcolm Gordon, thank you for coming along.
You're most welcome.
Now, the reason I asked that is we know each other quite well. In fact, we've been trying to do a podcast together for quite a number of months.
Since longer than you've done a podcast.
Yeah, actually, because we tend to get together and go, man, we should have had a mic during that conversation, and that was kind of part of the genesis of doing this. Actually,
isn't it like a philosophy thing? Like if two guys get together and not talk about starting a podcast, did they really get together?
But I was just saying to you, I find having lived on a 5-acre property in West Auckland that was covered in manuka, coming to Dunedin 5 years ago, there seems to be far less of it down here for burning, and you have a lovely big bunch of it in your front yard, and I want it.
Yeah,
I covet
you're
it.
coveting my firewood pile. Yeah, the sad thing is that's the leftover of last year's pile. We couldn't get back up this year because it was so dry, and we couldn't go up because it's in the middle of a big forestry plantation, so we couldn't use chainsaws. I could have hand-sawed the whole lot if I'd wanted to. But
what, meaning it was too danger of fire?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because chainsaws send off sparks, and it's in tinder dry wood, and so we couldn't get any more manuka this year.
So, as someone who are you actually a Presbyterian minister?
Actually, yes.
You are.
Yeah.
Because I know that you do various jobs and various things, and you're a singer-songwriter, and I'm sure we'll put some of your music up at some stage. But you are actually, as a Presbyterian minister,
yes,
that idea of giving should be quite, and I'm just wondering about your firewood, and about,
right.
do you have to tithe 10% or give away some of that?
Or? I mean, yes, I'm a Presbyterian minister, but not a very good one. So I tend to not look at too deeply into those regulations or expectations.
This is probably one of the strangest podcasts that literally we have no idea where we're going to go or of the conversation.
I'm a wee bit nervous.
Are you?
Wow.
Are you? Because do you have any concerns, honestly, about getting in a little bit of trouble today?
Yeah, probably. I'm just one sexual ethics workshop away from getting my certificate of good standing. So if we could just hold off until I've done that workshop. By the way, that's not just specifically for me. Every minister has to do that workshop.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it wasn't set aside. You have to do that before we give you the certificate. It's just a general, along with the police check and a ministry review. That's just general. Okay?
So the police check isn't just for you either?
Not just for me. It's for everybody.
Because the dreads, and I've been talking to someone in the last few weeks about Te Kitane being here in the weekend, and his name is Grosef Green. That's his name he uses, Grosef Green. It's a festival for cannabis use and stuff.
Oh, right.
But you'd fit quite well in that community right now. So.
Such stereotype.
But not just about you. Let's at some stage, Jace, bring up some of Malcolm's music and we'll play a little bit of it. Tell me about your music background. I mean, you've been doing that forever and a day. You singer-songwriter, put out a few CDs.
Yeah, I've been doing it on my own since my band broke up in 2006.
Hey, but that does mean at some stage you'll be able to use that famous line.
Yeah,
that we're getting the band back together.
Oh yeah, possibly.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The trouble is that the band let us down in terms of not quite getting to be big enough before we broke up, so that I have to explain that there was a band, which always weakens the story somewhat. Right. Unless you're in a very particular demographic in Otago Southland, then
It's funny when bands kind of, and I'll say run their course. I don't know about your band, and then they move away just as they're starting to do you remember the band 8?
Oh yes,
8, amazing band.
Yeah. It felt like they stopped just as they
arrived. They released their first album,
and had they broken up by the time they released it? Or
I remember being in a bar in Central Auckland. I don't know where it was. They just released their first album. They'd done, I think, EPs before that, but their first full album, and that was their last show.
Right. Yeah. Well, we released our second album, which was very much our serious coming of age album, and the one that we probably could have got people to take us seriously for. Yeah. And I think it was 5 or 6 months later we were done.
How does that happen? What's the conversation between the band? Just I think I'm done.
I think maybe there's a different. You become aware that there are different sets of expectations within the band members. So some people. We'd done a schools tour. We'd done some overseas stuff with Tier Fund, and some folk I think felt like this is further than I thought we were ever going to go. It's time to get on with real life.
So for some people it was, I don't want to say game in a derogatory way, but it was a bit of fun.
I think for some, I know our drummer thought that he should let us go so that we could carry on, and that he fully expected to come and see us play shows with a new drummer. But then a couple of other people were like, actually, time's up, and so.
Speak of the devil. So I was googling somebody's cousin and I came across the guitar player from 8, who was a friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah, he was not in somebody's cousin. You'll be probably doing quite well to find images of us online. We predated the internet.
1973.
I do remember, we were talking before we went at the air about you being rock and roll or not, and I do remember seeing you guys play once at the Regent, and it was rock and roll because you started bleeding on your fretboard, and your guitar went red with blood.
Yes, I dropped my pick in the middle of the song and played on through the rest of the song, grating my fingers into my pickups, and then. Oh, the most random thing ever. In between the next song, I looked down at the guitar and the blood on the stage, and then out of the audience, this young, 15-year-old reaches up with a plaster and gave it to me, and it was a very kind gesture.
It's well prepared.
Yeah, of course. You all know that you need to wipe the blood off and then dry it before you can put the plaster on, which I didn't have those facilities available to me on the stage at the Regent, so I put the plaster on and it didn't really stay, but I did pick up my pick and it was okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was up with just bending down and picking up your pick?
In the middle of the song. Well, I couldn't do it in the middle of the song, so after the song.
I don't know this for sure because I'm absolutely musically void, but I have seen professional musicians have a bit of tape on the back of the guitar where they have a couple of picks.
Yeah, I actually now put them in the little clip of the microphone, so this was possibly before I'd learnt that trick.
Right.
Yeah, that's where they go now. And I think a friend of mine bought me a little thing that goes down the side of the mic stand as well.
So when you get into the band, your ambition, I'm not saying but the one person's ambition is, this is us. Let's going to see what we can do with this.
Take over the world.
And someone else is like, this is fun. I've got to finish my engineering degree, but this is fun while I'm doing it. Or
yeah, maybe not just that it's fun thing, but like a genuine sense of people feeling like maybe they're a reason that they're holding the band back, and they've got to let the band go without them. Sort of like an altruistic, self-sacrifice narrative. But we'd been together for 5 years, and we were pretty tight. And the thought of bringing new people into that just sort of felt a bit icky. And in the end, it was sort of most of us were like, oh, well, if it's not going to be us, then is it really the cousins anymore?
So the edge left, and you decided we ain't you two without the edge.
Well, I mean that would be an interesting question. I mean, a band like the Red Hot Chili Peppers has survived lots and lots of different guitarists.
Have you seen that Foo Fighters documentary on Netflix, Back and Forth?
No.
Oh my God, one of my favourite documentaries of all time, and it starts off with Dave Grohl in Nirvana, and then the start of the documentary is about Cobain's suicide.
Yep.
And then what Dave had to go through, and then the first album he recorded in his basement because he just felt like doing something, did all the instruments himself, won Grammys with that. And I remember he makes a speech, something like, oh, I bet announced tonight has won a Grammy recording the whole studio in their basement, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But one of the points they make is that the number of people that have been through, and especially the drummers, right? Taylor Hawkins is the drummer now, but I think they went through 2 before Taylor Hawkins, maybe certainly 1. Right. And the point that Dave Grohl makes is he was the 5th drummer of Nirvana. But that all happened before they got huge.
Yep.
Unfortunately with the Foo Fighters, because Dave Grohl was already huge, all the kind of shuffling stuff happened in front of everybody.
Yeah. It's happening in full view.
But think about that. Dave Grohl was the 5th drummer of Nirvana.
They've also had 2 guitar players too. Pat Smear was their first guitarist.
Well, he's back.
And then he's come back.
Yeah, because they were a 4-piece, and I think they might be a 6-piece now.
Yeah, they've brought in a keyboard synth player as well.
So yeah, but the thing is, they continue on. I think most bands. I mean, we've just had it announced that. I know it's a bit different because Queen's been around forever, but with what's his name? I was going to say Adam Levine. That's not the right name. Queen with a new lead singer.
It's that dude.
They did
the dude who won that TV competition.
Well, they did a reality show, didn't they, for him to be the lead singer?
Oh wow!
And they've been touring the world for the last I don't know.
Well, are you getting confused? You're getting confused with NSX, aren't you?
No.
Because they did a reality show with NSX to get to find the lead singer as well, didn't they?
Adam Lambert.
Adam Lambert, yeah, he's the lead singer for Queen.
No, I'm pretty sure Queen did one as well. But look up Adam Lambert's
biography. Adam Lambert was actually a solo artist before he did anything with Queen.
Oh, maybe he did another kind of American Idol or something. You should be down with this. You're the musician. What are you looking at me like that for? You're like, what are you talking about?
I am conscientiously disinterested in music.
Really?
Yeah, I just can't, well, I mean, perhaps it's putting it too strongly. Music used to be my life in terms of the band, and then, a songwriter and making projects and writing songs and releasing albums and that kind of thing. Now I have 3 small children, and music is kind of a companion.
So it's more Wiggles music now.
I try to avoid. Our first child, Sam, got into the Wiggles in a big way, and that we've successfully kept Lucy away from the Wiggles.
Yeah.
Who's
they're coming to Dunedin, no?
No.
You should be in.
No, I don't know anything about it.
I took 2 of my girls.
I don't know about the new lead singer of Queen, and I do not know about the Wiggles coming to Dunedin.
I took 2 of my girls to High Five way back in the day. Yeah. And that's mostly because a couple of the girls in High Five were really nice to look at. That's why I took them.
Yes. I don't know what you're talking about.
It just shows that I'm a sexist pig who uses and abuses people for their appearance and nothing more.
Okay. Yep. Sure.
I'm allowed to be.
What are you saying about Emma Wiggle? Are you saying she's not attractive enough?
Emma Wigg? Who's that?
Emma Wiggle.
Oh, no. We were just talking about High Five. Yeah, High Five. See, you guys have got. You're not
going to go to the Wiggles because they don't look good enough for you.
Is Emma? No, it's because I'm old now, and that would be really weird. But when I had
children to justify taking.
But when I was 30 and had a little child,
yeah, that's fine.
And the High Five guys are in their 20s.
Yeah,
it's different from being me 55 and having frickin' Yellow Wiggle being a 14-year-old. That's just odd. She's the yellow one, eh? Yes. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I just seen the photos.
My daughter's obsessed with her. So.
Oh, see, because you guys have got younger kids than me, so maybe High Five doesn't make sense to you guys. High Five.
Oh no. We had High Five for Sam.
Oh right, okay.
Loathe High Five.
What are the young kids watching these days?
Paw Patrol.
I've heard of that, but I don't know what it is.
Something about trolls and
Fireman Sam.
Oh no, we haven't gone there.
Fireman Sam. It's interesting because it's a little bit like, Fawlty Towers did whatever it was, 12 episodes and no more, and The Office did that. Actually, some of those kids programs are like that.
Right.
Like some of them have done, 40 eps, and they've been playing for the last 15 years.
Well, I guess you've got to think about, they only have to get a kid through a certain stage of their life. So it might only be interesting to them from age 3 to 4.5, and then they're a big, nearly school kids, so they've grown out of it. So,
like Blue's Clues, I think that's one of the ones. Right. It did I might have done a few, but it's still on rotate from day one sort of thing. Because you're right, they go through that kind of 2 to 3, and then they don't watch it again. My kids are still learning that. They're still learning okay, you love this song, girls, this song from The Greatest Showman, but please just stop thrashing it because in a week's time you'll hate it. They did that with Frozen, like all kids. Frozen was because I've got 3 daughters, obviously, who are at home at the moment by themselves. Although I have a 15-year-old, so it's legal.
Oh, sweet.
So Sifs, you can just leave me alone.
Sifs, if you're watching.
Yeah, if you're watching. I'm sure you're tuned in.
Because Pat's a person of interest.
No, that was your
it might
thing.
be me.
After those comments about High Five, he is.
And they're still learning even at this age, as we all had to. It's a fad. It'll go through, Yep. I remember fads when I was going through school. Remember Chatterings? They came back.
Oh, yes.
Remember I got hacky sticks, they call them devil sticks or hacky sticks. They play with them that. They've all come back. Juggling.
Yeah, in fact, you start to get to the point where I am now suspicious of forms of art, whether they are TV shows or pieces of music or, visual art or whatever, that I like immediately. I'm actually now suspicious of those things because I tend to think they're appealing to something that is relatively superficial, and chances are there won't be much for me to come back to.
Oh,
so
give me an example. Can you think of a time where that's popped up, like you said, television show or pieces of music? So you watch something and you go, man, I really like this, and that causes suspicion.
Yeah. So there's a show, I can't even remember it's called W1A. Vanessa and my wife just started watching it the other night. It's a spoof reality show about Hugh Bonneville's character has just started working at the BBC, and he's the head of values, and nobody knows what that job title means, and he doesn't really know either, and he's trying to work it out on the job, and it's very funny and very easy to like. But I watched it and it just went down too easily. It didn't bring insight into my life. It didn't challenge me. It didn't intrigue me. It was just like vanilla ice cream.
But I had my children and I had vanilla ice cream last night. What's wrong with a bit of vanilla ice cream?
Nothing's wrong with vanilla ice cream, but it's probably not going to be the thing.
What's wrong with that?
Probably not the thing that, like, at the end of the day, when you're told you've got time for one more meal, like, you're probably not going to go, give me some of that sweet, sweet vanilla ice cream. Like, you're probably going to think about the rhubarb crumble with the walnuts and the crust and the, like, whatever. Like, there'll be something more.
But you're putting a lot of your metaphor is putting a lot of importance in a television show of one last thing left. What's wrong with having?
There's nothing wrong with it.
What's wrong with having a bowl of vanilla ice cream?
Nothing wrong with it, but
enjoying it.
Nothing wrong with it, but I'm not going to buy the DVD box set of this thing. And it'll be I'll watch it on those nights when I don't want to be challenged, and but in terms of if I extrapolate it out to pieces of art, I'm not going to want like a poster of that hanging on my wall because it's not going to evoke something of depth and meaning to me. It's not going to keep a conversation going. It is what it is, and at the end of it, it's finished. There is no loose threads left, for me to resolve as a person at the end of that. I think that's what good art does. Is it starts conversations, it doesn't try to finish.
It sort of evokes emotion, makes you ask questions, challenges you.
It's why people hang certain things in their living rooms so that they can see them every day for their entire lives, because there's something to come back to. And a lot of contemporary creativity and artwork is and it's probably been true of most creativity through most. I'm not just judging contemporary, but I'm saying the contemporary creativity of all generations has probably been reasonably superficial, and it's occasional that you find something. A TV show that you want to watch again, for example, because there's actually a journey that you go on and questions that are raised and emotions that it draws. Like I've never watched Game of Thrones.
Oh, last night, Jace, did you watch it?
Okay,
I'm with Malcolm on this.
But I will be interested.
That was why we had ice cream, because we had a roast lamb meal. We had roast veggies. The flatmates, everyone was around. People came over, and we had apple crumble and ice cream for dessert. Watching Game of Thrones.
Okay,
it was freaking awesome.
See, vanilla ice cream with apple crumble. Now that makes perfect sense, because the ice cream is not taking away from the apple crumble, but
and a bit of custard as well. Actually,
you only said you had vanilla ice cream for dessert, and that's not the whole story. Anyway, the proof of whether Game of Thrones is a great piece of art or not will be whether or not, when the great reveals have happened in the final season, people then go back and watch it again, whether or not it holds in, or if it's just in the intrigue of what's going to happen. If it's just in the intrigue of what's going to, I never saw that coming. And
so are we saying that things that you can watch again and again and again are great pieces of art?
I think so. But
what about me, for example? I'm a moron. I always say I'm probably the dumbest person in the room, and I enjoy that position.
And you're almost always wrong, but carry on.
I also have a part of me which likes what you were describing as vanilla.
So do I.
So I like a program called Catfish. Right. Complete trash. Utter trash. MTV dating show. Complete trash.
Yes.
I can watch those episodes. Like if I see one come on as a repeat, I can watch it again. But but I know it's utter trash. It's not great art, but I can watch it again. So what does that speak to?
Well, I think it speaks to the fact that you're probably like on the couch and like it's not time to go to bed yet, and you've got half an hour, and there's like, I would think about myself in that space as it's just a way of letting my brain like sort of run lazily on the treadmill for a while. Like it's helpful because it's not asking big questions. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't serve any purpose just because it's not great art, but it's not going to go down. It's not going to get put into Toitu. It's not going to get, like people are not going to revisit this in university papers in 30 years' time saying...
Do you know what's interesting though? There are some programs, some pieces of art that may be complete trash that would make it into Toitu because maybe they were the first of something.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think that, I don't know if, I think The Office is probably quite good. The Ricky Gervais show is quite a good thing, but it was the first kind of, breaking the fourth wall mockumentary. Well, it wasn't the first, but it was one that started a new genre. People might think that's trash and it was only 12 episodes, but that would be in Toitu as a new thing. Whatever the first, in fact, what were we just talking about? Sorry, this is when this is great life. No, not us. Sorry, I'm just thinking about something that started something new. I did this conversation yesterday. It was a television show that started. Anyway, it still can be trash TV, but if it's a new genre I'm sure the first series of Survivor would be in Toitu.
Yeah. As an artifact of our civilization. but not that. But it wouldn't be in an art gallery.
I don't know. They talk about marketing being kind of this generation's great pieces of art.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So neither of you guys are Game of Thrones guys?
Nah.
No.
Not interested?
Not into fantasy.
Probably. Oh, see, I am into fantasy.
I had a conversation with someone the other day. I've got some Beats headphones, and they told me very clearly the reason they didn't buy Beats headphones is because everyone else has got them, and they're kind of a bit of a trend.
To be fair, I do hate coming late to a party, so I do have
to.
So
that's what I'm saying.
But it's got nothing to do with Game of Thrones.
Is it because everyone loves it that you're just rejecting it? Or?
Well, I mean, that's why I never read The Purpose-Driven Life. Which is
do we need to give context to people?
Some people will go, what the hell? And other people will like, oh, I totally know what he's talking about. The Purpose-Driven Life, friends, was a book that swept the Christian scene about, 10 years ago. And everybody had read it, and at every conference you went to, it was being, talked about, and workshops were being given. And
I think I did the small group series.
Oh, Jason, yeah, there you go.
Not necessarily completely by choice. But
yeah. Probably there was a girl called Rochelle doing the group that you were interested in spending time with. And that was willing to suffer through. Okay, yeah, so I mean that's exactly why.
Right.
And it's why I resent all the people who got into Coldplay after Viva La Vida when I was a fan since before Parachutes.
Yeah.
I'm like, you bloody bandwagon jumpers. Yeah.
Just looking at this lovely.
You've seen it, haven't
I've
you?
never touched it.
No, nor have I. I wouldn't. No. But
melt my hand.
That's not why I haven't watched Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting Game of Thrones. I like it.
No doubt.
Interesting. I'm thinking about watching things again. Have you guys seen Vikings?
No.
Nope.
Really, really, really good program. It's a History Channel program where they take real characters. Mm-hmm. So, the main characters are people in either real mythology or real history. The history of the region. And obviously they can't be a historically accurate day-to-day program, but then they do the battles and the fights that are recorded in history.
Right.
Really, really interesting. Really, really good. If you ever were going to watch it, I remember watching the first half of the first episode about 3 times.
Right.
Give it 2 episodes. And my 15-year-old has just started watching it. Yeah. And I'm rewatching it with her and still loving it. So, love it. It's like my favorite program. I won't give any spoilers away, but because it's got that historical element, like one of the characters in it at one series is called Ivor the Boneless. And Ivor the Boneless was a Viking who had some condition that gave him his leg, basically couldn't walk. He would have had some kind of condition. And you can go and look up Wikipedia and you can look up the story of Ivor the Boneless and what he did, and you can see it mirrored in the series, and it's cool. Love it.
I find myself, because on a recommendation of a friend, I watched an episode and a half recently of Norseman, which is a spoof of Vikings, and I stopped in the halfway through the second episode. It was funny. But I stopped because I have noticed it might be just me getting older, but I really don't have the stomach for the violence.
Oh, if you've got no stomach for violence, don't watch Vikings.
And also,
it is incredibly gratuitous and graphic, and probably historically accurate.
Yes, precisely.
Like Saving Private Ryan.
This is one of the reasons. It's the main reason I never watched The Passion of the Christ.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was there was this. Again, people on the outside of the church, probably don't remember or weren't aware of it. But there was this big
big.
I know it was pretty big, but within the church there was this kind of narrative that you have to watch this to see what Jesus did for us.
Right.
And my comeback at the time was, if my best friend got tortured and killed, and there was a video made of it. Like, I wouldn't be signing up to watch that.
If ISIS released a video,
I wouldn't watch that video to see what my friend went through. And I found it, there is a strange undercurrent and fascination with the notion of redemptive violence in Western culture, that violence can ultimately bring about good, and that I think is deeply disturbing about our culture, and more disturbing about a religion, a faith perspective that is built on a guy who is proclaimed as the Prince of Peace. That we have this perpetual and nagging conviction that the violence that went on there is salvific.
So that redemptive violence within society in general, would you include things like, you know, wars that one country describes as the greater good?
The just war theory that like this, we have to overcome this evil and we'll have to do something nasty in the process. But if we don't, you know, and the classic example that's used of that is, you know, World War II. People, you know, whenever somebody is arguing with a pacifist, it's only like a matter of like 60 seconds before they bring up, well, what would you have done in Europe in 1939?
Would you have killed Hitler?
Yeah, precisely. And you know, it's a great question because, I mean, one of the great theologians of the 20th century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was involved in a plot to simply, like, to exactly do that, to assassinate Hitler, who's a Christian pastor and a theologian. And he decided, actually, the least evil thing I can do is try and bring an end to this evil. However, sorry, Jason. Murray Ray, who's at the theology department in Otago here, says that that's an 11th hour argument.
Right.
And
all other things have been tried and failed.
Yeah, he said that pacifism and everything else has already failed by that stage.
Right.
And if you really want to know about why we ended up with Hitler, you've got to go back to the Treaty of Versailles, which established such an oppressive regime upon Germany out of retribution after World War I that all of the Allied countries, and we're closing in on the 100-year not celebration but anniversary of the treaty, and it's possibly the most significant thing that we will overlook this year, because what the Allies did was that they counted up all the money it cost them to beat Germany in the war, and then gave Germany the bill and said, you can pay for that now, you can pay for the bombs that we dropped on you, and the gas that we used and the bullets that we fired at you. And so then Germany was like depressed and impoverished when they couldn't meet the bills. The French invaded some of their most profitable factory districts, and then the workers went on strike. The hyperinflation, you know, a loaf of bread that would cost you 60 marks in the morning would cost you, you know, 20,000 in the evening when you came home from work. Restaurants weren't even writing up their prices like when you were eating, because they were just ticking up as you ate. And then ultimately you created this extremist environment where somebody like Hitler sounded like they were making really good sense, because he was going to give dignity back to the German people who'd had it stripped away from them. Now, the World War I, we weren't talking about like this evil, you know, scenario. We were just talking about a civil war within Europe, and it all just kind of escalates, gets out of control. But the fact that the Ally response to World War I, historians now believe, caused World War II. We created the environment in which a monster like Hitler grows up, and then we justify the violence that we use to repress it, being completely oblivious to the fact that our violence toward the defeated German people, the reason they surrendered was because the British Navy was blockading Germany and the people were starving. The British people were starving the German civilian population, the British Army, Navy. And so there's all this stuff that we're just not telling while we have our ANZAC ceremonies and our remembrances of, you know, the what was done to win the peace and all those kind of storylines that are unchallenged.
Yeah, I remember having these conversations when I was doing Talkback, and the unchallenged thing is interesting, because I would pose the question about Hiroshima, for example. You know, how many hundreds of thousands of innocent people died? And I think we in the West, and probably as the winners of those wars, winners, quote, winners, you know, the winners get to write the history, and we were the liberators, and that. But both sides broke horrific laws when it comes to things like the Geneva Convention. As soon as you drop a bomb on a civilian population, you have committed a war crime.
Yeah, I was just reflecting yesterday that it is the Geneva Convention, like, I guess it's a good thing, but it is a funny, like, if you step back from it, we've agreed we're going to kill each other, but now we want to do it in a gentlemanly fashion. We want to kill each other humanely. And I think something has already been lost when we made the decision we're going to kill each other.
Look, I think you're right. I think it's madness overall. But, I mean, if you had an agreement within some conflict that you weren't going to kill innocents, which obviously has never then happened, I mean, you know, it's like if I don't want to say it's like a game of chess, but you and I are playing a game of chess, and we agree that we're going to play a game of chess, but then you punch Jason in the face along the way, saying that's not part of the rules. We're just playing, you know. I also think the hypocrisy of the whole thing is that the losers suffered the penalties of the human rights breaches. And I'm not using any words or anything. I'm just saying the losers. I'm not classifying them as particular groups of people because I don't want to be called a Nazi sympathizer. That's basically what I'm saying. But the losers suffered the effects of the human rights, horrific human rights things they think. But the winners who also contributed human rights violations, fine. Good example of recent times is Japanese soldiers were put to death, I think at the end of World War II, for waterboarding American soldiers.
Right.
And then after 9/11, one of the tactics of America was to waterboard, opposing forces, so to speak.
The British invented the concentration camp during the Boer War for Afrikaans civilian populations. So we don't need to look into the sickness of the Nazi mind to work out where they came up with this. It's like it actually came from our side of the equation, and I grew up in a school with a board commemorating students who'd gone and fought in that war, been part of that storyline. Now, does that mean we don't commemorate or remember? Not at all, but it certainly means that we need to remember rightly.
Yeah. So so it's interesting that, again, who knew we were going to talk about Anzac Day today? That's next week, eh? Next week?
Yeah, it's just after 25th? Easter. Yeah.
So how do you do it? Do you do it? Do you talk about the kids with it? What's your focus?
Yeah, we do talk about
Anzac Day.
We do talk about it with the kids. And a couple of years ago, I preached at a church. I think the Sunday was Anzac Day or something like that, and I told the story of some of the conscientious objectors in the New Zealand story. Archibald Baxter, J.K. Baxter's father,
and he's having a monument built in Dunedin, isn't he? I believe
that'd be fantastic. J.K. Baxter or his father, Archibald.
The Archibald Baxter.
Okay,
Google that, Jace. Do something like pacifist statue Dunedin, and it'll come up, I'm sure.
Yeah. And the other thing is there's an amazing film that TVNZ put out a few years ago called Field Punishment No. 1, which just follows the story of Archibald Baxter. I think it's still free to view on TVNZ website. So worth looking if people haven't seen it. But definitely I try and tell the complexity of the story, not a simple there were bad guys doing bad things and we went over and fought for freedom. But given that the storyline starts at Anzac for us, and I visited Anzac Cove and done the kind of the pilgrimage of a young New Zealander. My wife and I just married, went over there and did the Anzac Day thing. You really do have to do some violence to history to arrive at the fact that we were fighting for freedom. Like, we were New Zealanders fighting because Britain had told us, and we were fighting against Ottomans. The dying Ottoman Empire for a strategic gain. We were in that game of chess. We were pawns, and we didn't matter to either of the kings who were running this game. And so I remember the head of the New Zealand Defence Force stood at Gallipoli at the dawn service and said, "We come here every year so that metaphorically we never have to come here again." And that was heartwarming for me to hear that here's a guy who's a professional soldier saying we remember this story so that we don't do it again. Like, we don't get caught up in a meaningless act of killing and lives that had potential and hope being snuffed out for no conceivable gain. And that to me seems to be the stories of those wars. So I try and tell a more, it doesn't, and the thing is that story doesn't resolve neatly because it shouldn't. There's nothing like neat about those stories, so that I invite my kids into a complex as much as they can.
I think this is, Jace, do you want to, if you can bring that up if you like. I think this is going corner, for those people who are in Dunedin, corner of Albany Street and George Street, opposite the wonderful and fabulous Roy, whatchamacallit, the ice cream place,
the Rob Roy.
Right. I think it's going in there.
Going up that.
Yeah, so where that crisscross is, I think that's where it is. And it's been. I think I read about that last year, and it's going to supposedly being put up there.
Cool.
It's interesting as well when you talk about we stand on the beaches to not repeat it. I can't help but then look at America today and look at Trump, and I don't want to compare Trump to Hitler. I don't think that is, for me, doesn't feel right. I'm not trying to do that. That implies.
I think Hitler was smarter.
But what you said about, Hitler giving people kind of an identity, or,
yes.
Giving them their
dignity,
country back, whatever it is. You can see parallels. And
it's a narrative of fear. You've got to create the them to galvanize the us, and that's been like the battle that humanity has been in to try and come of age, where we're not having to demonize the other.
But probably one of the big differences as well is, I suspect that when Hitler was rising up in Germany, he perhaps had the whole country behind him.
Oh no, but he galvanized the whole country behind him by targeting the gays and the Jews and the gypsies and the communists, and the communists in that foment of oppression and degradation of the German people. The fascists and the socialists were kind of like the two possibilities. Of course, you had Russia feeding the socialist thing and the movements that Hitler was a part of. So to target the communists was a strategic move to get rid of his main competition. So that's how we ended up with that.
And I think the difference now is that those sectors of society, or their equivalent of, be they Mexican or whatever, there's half of the population of America who's saying, leave them alone. Whereas perhaps with Hitler, and I don't know the stats, you maybe had a 90-10 split, so it was a lot easier to galvanize the whole country behind you or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you have any... I always remember the idea that, from patriotism goes nationalism, goes fascism.
Right.
And it feels to me that many Americans, certainly on that side of the political sphere, are in that nationalism stage at the moment.
Yeah.
So how do you stop them? What's the danger of them going from nationalism into fascism? Ironically, with all those same Americans would be like, fascism. Oh no, we're not going there. But that's the I won't say natural progression, because that makes it sound like it's inevitable.
Right.
But that's the progression. That's where it goes next.
Yeah. And you're asking me as a singer-songwriter who happens to be a Presbyterian minister?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Good to know.
You and the big guy upstairs can sort this out, can't you?
Yes, well, I'll just confer with my superiors.
But you know what I mean? It seems, I don't have that concern. I don't want to say, like, people talk about Trump being Hitler and everyone who supports him. I hate that thing about, you're a Nazi because you support Hitler. It's not true.
Yeah.
And I don't have a concern of it going that way, mostly because of the checks and balances within that system.
Yes.
I don't think he has the capacity of overriding the Senate and the House. And I think because we stand on the beaches and remember what happens, far more people and groups of people would stand up today and go, no, than could have, would have, should have back then.
Yeah, but I mean, the American kind of remembrance is vastly different to that kind of remembrance that I underwent in Gallipoli. And frighteningly, the kind of remembering that is now going on around in New Zealand ANZAC Day services is vastly different to what I experienced in Gallipoli. So I think we are heading towards a romanticising of the narrative around our involvements in the great conflicts of the 20th century to the point where we can start to justify and justify our actions, vilify the opposition, start to create a myth around what was accomplished, what the motivations of those who went. Greater love hath no man than he who laid down his life for his friend. That gets reeled out at every Anzac Day service. But the guy who said that, Jesus Christ, didn't die with a gun in his hand. He died as a victim of a crooked judicial and religious system, and yet we then pluck it and then put it next to these guys who were young kids who'd been sold the lie of a great overseas adventure.
Read the cartoons, the war cartoons that looked exciting.
And I grew up reading Commando magazines, and they filled my mind, we were the Tommies and they were the Jerrys and they were the Hun and they were the Japs, and like giving me all of this vocabulary to fill in that storyline. And I think that sadly, perhaps the Christchurch mosque attack will change that narrative, but I think we've been slipping into an American kind of remembrance, which is not about we remember so we don't go here again, but it's more about we are glorifying what's gone on before, and
if they hadn't have gone, we'd all be speaking German. Yeah,
for the freedom of the world,
which is such a shit. By the way, it's such a shit argument, because if that was true, all the countries that were defeated would be speaking American, and they're not. In Japan, they still speak Japanese.
Yeah.
In German, they still speak German. In Russia, they still speak Russian. So for people to go, oh, if they had one, we would have been speaking. It's a terrible argument. It's a terrible argument.
There's last year I was doing my master's research, and I came across, as part of it, people at home, just stay with me for the next 15 seconds as I get through the boring bits, but I was researching the way that spirituality developed around suffering, and so I was reading some of the prayers that people had written, particularly after World War I, and the services of remembrance that developed after World War I. So I came across one that was 1928, so 10 years after the end of the First World War. They were already beginning to talk in a way where the sacrifice of those who'd gone and died was being justified as for this greater good. Now, the fascinating thing was that within wider society, you had poets like Siegfried Sassoon who were coming and writing these profoundly revealing portraits of what had happened in the trenches and how god-awful it was and how pointless it all was, and yet the church was maintaining this narrative almost at the behest of the official company line of that culture, almost like the church was the spiritual propaganda machine. We were saying, but it was all for a good cause, and it was just terrifying to see the way that the spiritual language of the church became hijacked to fulfill what's essentially a political aim to keep people thinking, yes, it was worthwhile losing my brother, my son, my husband, my father, whatever else for my community.
So did they do that, in your opinion, because they were trying to further the narrative of we're the good guys, you're the bad guys, etc.? This was a just war, etc. Or did they do that because they looked in their congregation and they didn't want those people to feel like they'd fought for nothing? So in other words, they were little white lies because there were people in that congregation who, if the pastor had gone, this was all bullshit, we didn't need to do this, it was a load of crap. You know what I mean? Like, is there an element of both in your opinion?
Oh, look, I can't pretend to know what's going on, but I do think I did know what I thought there for a moment. That no, it's gone. What did you just ask me?
The church, you talk about being propaganda of that narrative.
Yeah, that's right.
Why were they a propaganda of the narrative? Was it to help the people in there deal with it, or was it because they were still trying to further that narrative?
Well, I think that our spiritual language reveals a lot about like who we are and what's going on in us. I think there is an innate fear, and particularly from institutional religion, to not have the answers. So if you are...
So there's a fear... So I what I'm hearing you saying, and I'll act as a bit of a go-between here and to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying as well. The fear not to have the answers, there are many in the church who don't like the answer, I don't know.
Yeah, or the answer, this shouldn't have happened.
Right.
Yeah. So what you end up with in the West is kind of a religion that's revolving around fatalism. So they have such a... because of theologians like John Calvin, who's granddaddy of Presbyterianism, sorry everybody, he did some good things though. But one of his things was that the sovereignty of God, he dialed that up to 11, basically to the point where God was in charge of everything that was happening, and so nothing that was happening was wrong because God was in charge of everything.
Kids with cancer, war.
So Calvin's own wife,
husband
dying,
beating his wife
before she should have, all those sorts of things, and so you end up with a religion that's essentially spiritualized fatalism, where what has happened, had to happen, must have happened, was God's will to happen.
So basically no free will almost?
So it gets murky there because, and I don't pretend to understand all of it. But what you have at the grassroots of our faith was this reinforcement of the narrative that this was not a great failure of human reason, that this was not a departure, that this was not us getting lost. This was not going off the map. This was, and afterwards we were able to write that narrative more firmly because we had won. Mm-hmm. So all of the losses and deaths and the broken lives all became. We were able to call them sacrifices. No, sacrifices as a uniquely religious piece of language.
They sacrificed their lives for you.
But not
for
just
our freedoms.
For our freedom. So all of a sudden, those things, they were not sacrifices at the time. They were strategic. losses. Okay, we're going to put the New Zealanders and the Australians over here. They will be cannon fodder while we land the British over here, who we actually care about because we know their second cousin in there. And so, but then afterwards we start talking about it as they made the greatest sacrifice. So we just have to be aware the way that the language is being played with, and ultimately our understanding of events are being played with.
I would also think the idea of sacrifice involves agency. If you're put in front of the cannons, if you don't have agency to make that decision, that doesn't feel like a sacrifice. You know what I mean? It's like if you were drowning and I knew that going to save you was going to put my life in jeopardy, I'm making that choice. If someone picked me up off the boat and threw me in and said, go and get him, that feels like assisted murder or something else. It doesn't feel like a sac. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose we're saying that when these people signed up and went, they knew what they were going to. But of course, if you look at the messages that were being given to these young men when they did go, they didn't know what they were going to, and they were sold a completely different kind of storyline than what they encountered. So look, this will rage on, but I do hope that we can come to something a bit more nuanced. And nuance is not a strength of the great stories that hold us together. But it's interesting that this newer storyline of around the Anzac remembrance has only taken on, in my opinion, since the death of the last of the veterans. We're now getting to the point where we're having Anzac Day services with very few, if any, veterans from any of those two global conflicts. And I think it's only been in their absence that we've been able to tell a more heroic, less connected to reality storyline. I don't think it's members of RSA who are driving this.
I'm just thinking about the numbers. There's no one from World War One left.
No.
Because you would have been born in the 1890s.
Yeah.
But World War Two, you would have been born in the 1920s.
Yeah.
But you're going to be in your 90s.
Yes. Yeah. So we're getting to. I remember my first Anzac Day services. There being like 3 or 4 old guys at the Milton Cenotaph, and they'd fought in World War One.
Wow.
Yeah. So because that would have been in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So they would have been probably in their 90s by that stage, if they'd been young men when they went. But we're now getting to the point where we're moving out of the living generation who were there, and now society is creating a narrative in their place, in their stead. One of the most revealing things for me was at the service at Chunnock Bear. So you go at Gallipoli, you're at Anzac Cove, and you have the big service with everybody there and at dawn, and then you go up the hill to Lone Pine, you have the Australian service, and then you go up the hill again to Chunnock Bear, and you have the New Zealand service, and you sort of lose people as you go because the Turks don't bother coming to the Australian one, and the Australians one don't bother coming to the Kiwi one. And anyway, the Kiwi one was pretty lame, to be honest. We had to sing this Shirley Murray hymn that nobody knew and mumbled our way through it, and accompanied by the New Zealand military band. And
we had no,
and then not quite that one. And then at the end, the service is finished, and up jump these guys, and they perform the All Black haka. And at the end of that, there's this rapturous applause.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that is a strange thing to do. We've just done a war dance to commemorate a battle that we lost, and it was pointless. To mark that, we have done a war dance, and then we've responded to that with applause. And it felt to me like we as a nation had very few tools in our kete to draw on that we actually could use in situations like this.
I obviously wasn't there with you, but I wonder if you are looking at the haka in too much of a narrow perspective. You think about when the principal of the school gets wheeled out, they do a haka, and in that context I don't think it would be considered a war dance, even if it was the same words. You think about someone getting married and they do a haka. I wonder, for me, for example, I find the haka to be far more emotional and mean far more to me than, for example, our national anthem. And I don't, and I understand what you're saying because the origins of it is, but I wonder if the evolution of it is to be actually a mark of respect, a sign of respect.
Yeah, I take that, but I think the specificity of the All Black haka, kamiti, in the sense that one is always done with aggression.
Yeah,
it's always done at the beginning of a contest.
Well,
a physical contest?
Could I suggest as well?
A school haka would have a different narrative behind it.
Could I suggest as well, just to expand on the narrative, not knowing the answer, that perhaps one of the reasons we see kāmati at perhaps what you're suggesting are inappropriate times, maybe, or juxtaposition or ironic times, is because that's the one that 90% of people know.
Yeah, and that's
that
what I
could just
say.
be it as well. That could have become our national haka no matter what.
Yeah, but that's what I mean about us having
not enough tools.
We don't have enough tools in our kete. We don't have enough breadth of cultural expression. We've lost the ability to grieve together. We've lost the ability to celebrate together, and what we're left with is what our sporting teams show us, and we mimic that and try and make it multi-purpose, but it's not. It doesn't really give us the opportunity to be fully human in these. It leaves too much on the cutting room floor, I think.
The idea of back in the day, and I'm paraphrasing here because I want to talk about Israel Folau, actually, but talking about the church and talking about the narrative they painted once they came back from war being slightly skewed, and that's my words, not yours, but just to expedite this conversation.
Yeah.
The Israel Folau situation at the moment is really interesting because he is obviously in a fair amount of trouble over words he said. Can we bring up that original Instagram post there, Jace, just to make sure we don't misrepresent him? Because we wouldn't want to get it wrong. We wouldn't want to paint him in a negative light.
Did he take the time to make that meme, or did he borrow it from somewhere else?
I don't know. Warning: drunks, homosexuals, adulterers, liars, fornicators, thieves, atheists, idolaters. Hell awaits you. Repent, only Jesus saves. And a bunch of writing down the side. Yeah. I'm interested and have been interested all week in this conversation. There was a story written, Jace, it's at, is her name Divine, that one there, saying he's been sacked for being a Christian. I put that on my Facebook page actually and kind of said, ironically, none of the other Christians in the Wallabies, like David Pocock, for example, have been sacked for being a Christian, so maybe that's not what it's about. It's more about breach of contract and bringing the as they say, the company into disrepute or disrepair, whichever it is.
Disrepute, I think.
And then you've got guys like Brian Tamaki, and I know people's position on Brian Tamaki, but he asked the question, if you take words directly out of the Bible and then society reacts as the way they are right now, are you making the Bible hate speech? Because people are calling what Israel Folau did hate speech.
Yeah.
And the other point I made, and this is interested to get, Presbyterian pastor's view on, is that one of the things I struggle with in this whole conversation a little bit is that Israel Folau has said something that actually, my opinion, as in you're more involved in the church, and I was more involved, but you can speak to this or not. My opinion is, if you sat down 100 church-going Christians,
yes,
the majority of them, now I don't know whether that's 51 or 91, but the majority of them would agree with those sentiments in private. So is it more of a concern that the majority of the people who attended church, in my opinion, I don't have the stats, but from my experience, which is vast in that area, would agree with that thought? Certainly they'd agree with some of those thoughts. They might not think drunks were going to hell, but a lot of them would think homosexuals are going to hell. What's worse? What's worse, that he said it,
or that a bunch of people think it,
or that? And I'm going to use the word majority because that's my experience. I could be wrong. I'm happy if someone has the stats that prove me wrong. Fine, but the majority of people think it within a. And I'm not talking. People say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," but what that means is they were raised in the Catholic Church and they've never been back since. I'm talking about people who are sort of church attenders, regular church attenders, and then that would be even more heavily weighted, for example, in the more conservative church world, the evangelical world, for example.
Yes. So you're asking if it's more concerning that one guy has said it, or if that potentially a bunch of people believe that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
And also, I guess, just to come back, that narrative that the church is painting, I mean, is the church supporting this? Obviously, his church is supporting this, and there are a bunch of people wrapping around him at the moment. I'm not speaking of these people because I don't know their positions, but I have seen posts by lots of people in the church world, some with blue checks by their name, meaning they're, high profile,
right?
That are basically saying, this is what the Bible says. You can't sack him for this. He's got a case against religious discrimination, etc., etc., etc.
Well, and this is one of those fascinating moments where our society has to work out how the competing narratives that we've lined up alongside each other as being kind of fundamental human rights which ones of these are going to be the trump card at the moment? Is religious freedom more important than freedom of speech? And that one seems to be crashing into each other all the time. And this is an example where you get secular society, having removed itself from a religious understanding of the world, is now having to work out kind of in free-form style which of these ones we're going to say is the Trump suit to lead the conversation. And at the moment, being able to call things hate speech is seems to be a really effective trump card in our society. I think I have thought for a long time that a society that takes young men and women with physical potential and pays them enough money and to dedicate themselves to perfecting their physical potential, to then expect them to be moral role models, that is a weird society. Yeah. And I thought it was weird when...
So in other words, your skill set that we're recognising you for is you have a great muscle mass, you're really quick, you've got great ball handling skills.
Great hand-eye coordination.
Now we're going to actually delve into your morality, your
intellect. But we also want you to be...
a theologian, a philosophica?
Yeah. A linguist. I mean, I thought it when Jimmy Cowan used to get paraded before the in the papers for having a drinking problem and that kind of thing. I was like, why? When did we expect that to change? Given that all we've done is ask that guy to be strong, quick, and then given him beer when he's done a good job. Like, when did we think that was going to catch us out? And yet we make it his fault. And yes, you get these great examples like Richie McCaw, who's like the guy who every daughter's father wishes would bring home. He just seems there's nothing wrong with that guy. But the majority of these people are human. And I look at Israel Folau and be like, this is not a voice of somebody that we necessarily need to be giving this much authority to, but we do because we say, oh, he's a national figure. And this raises questions about social media and just the weight that we give to people simply because they're celebrities. Like, what qualification do these people have to be speaking about these things? Probably very little, but because they're famous, we listen to them, we take them seriously. We shouldn't be taking them seriously just because they're famous. There's no qualification at all.
I'd really like to know his story. This might have been a meme and it might be completely false, but Jace, you could Google this for us. There was a picture I saw the other day, and maybe it was false. Maybe someone put it together and it was false. Right. And it was Israel Folau on a poster for a like an LGBT rugby league. Right. Like, in other words, supporting it from 10 years ago sort of thing. Right. If that is true, and I don't know if it is or if it isn't, but if it was, then I wonder, just go down to the left there. Yeah, that one there at the top. That one. Is that real? Or not? That's the poster I've seen. Now, I don't know whether someone's taking the piss or not. Is that News Hub? Well, I mean, if it's on News Hub, you'd think that's probably for real. So in his...
Well, who knows, these days...
Well, what does he say? Wallaby superstar Israel Folau may be under fire for his homophobic social media post, but 5 years ago, he was a leading advocate for the world's biggest gay rugby tournament. Well, there you go. That's a news source. That's fairly reputable. I'd like to know what happened over that 5-year period, and if someone can go from supportive, encouraging, ally to the community to putting out what many are calling hate speech, or putting out certainly "you're damned to hell."
Yes.
And if that's when he started the church world, what the hell does that say about the church world?
Yeah. This does raise questions around the way that the church is now positioned in our society. And so if you went back 60, 70 years, the church was the moral, ethical conscience of the society, that the Christian worldview, such as it had been domesticated by Western culture, was, and particularly around personal sexual moral ethics, was the company line. Now, what's happened in the last 50, 60, 70 years is that the church has slipped out of that central position secularism has taken over, and the church is now in pluralism, and the church is now a marginal voice. But you've got many in the church who think that the church should be back in the centre and in charge. So you've got people kind of lobbing these moral hand grenades into the centre of the public discourse, expecting everyone to fall in line. And so using the threat of hell, for example, which is really how Christendom maintained control over people, was the threat of hell and the promise of heaven. When you move outside of a world where those things are taken as a given now, you just start to look at these situations and these people who are perpetuating these storylines and kind of start to feel a bit sorry for them, because what it's speaking of is a community of people who used to be central and important and are now marginal and have not gotten used to it and can't cope with that shunting out of the limelight. And in a weird way, this is bringing them back into the limelight, although not for great reasons. And so, but I say them, I'm a part of that same institution, I'm part of the Christian church. But I do think it's interesting that the church has held sway for a long, long time. And now we're kind of seeing the death throes of Christendom, where the church is not quite ready to let go with telling people how to live their lives and who they can sleep with and who they can marry. And it's amazing, because we've been remarkably kind of negligent with the things that are really obvious about Christian teaching about welcome of strangers and foreigners, and the care of innocents and widows and orphans, and what we do with our money and all those sorts of things, which is like really, really clear in Christian scripture. But there's these particular things around sexual ethics have become these bugbears, and we do need to name them as that. They've become the church has become fixated on them, and on the basis of really quite scant biblical foundation. We've built these really strong convictions, and I just wonder if they're not quite as central as we think they are.
Go to YouTube for us, Jace, and look up Tony Campolo Gay Son. There's a clip, and if we can find this, I'll recognise it straight away. I've watched it a lot, and I think one of the things it speaks to me is about that's not it. It is that dark one there. Story of a Gay Son. That's it. Down. Yep, that's it. Click on that. Now go right towards the end, like the last 90 seconds, and then pause it there for a sec. This is what, in my opinion, you're the professional Christian. I think the church has got wrong in that whole kind of pointing out to people you're going to hell. This is a story with Tony Campolo, and people who are involved in the church will probably recognise his name. He got a phone call late at night from a woman about her gay son, and he goes, and the woman wants to know, when God judges everybody,
yes,
will it all be at the same time, or do you get judged as soon as you die? And the reason she asked the question was
she wants to be there, doesn't she?
She wants to be there so
she can speak
and say that she
on
had
his behalf.
A good boy.
Yeah,
he was a good boy.
Yeah.
So just give us a bit of volume, Jason. I'll tell you where to go, because I
find out that a close friend or a relative.
Okay, skip just a little bit more. It's not much further past that.
It is not the abstract caricature, I should say, not caricatured by some television or radio event.
Starts with them basically saying this is a good place to finish.
Hurting, and I believe that we're uptight. When somebody says, you don't understand, a lot of people who are listening, this is a good place to wrap this
leave it there.
Will say,
have a listen.
You don't understand, Tony. I love the sinner, but I hate his sin. I'm sure you've heard that line over and over again. And my response is, that's interesting, because that's just the opposite of what Jesus says. Jesus never says, love the sinner, but hate his sin. Jesus says, love the sinner and hate your own sin. And after you get rid of the sin in your own life, then you can begin talking about the sin in your brother or sister's life.
There you go. I think that's a pretty interesting filter. And speaking of that, we've got a lovely meme that went out about Israel Folau, not to shit on him one more time, where someone was pointing out the hypocrisy of someone pointing out all the sins of all the other people in the world.
But there's again,
just before you that, do you know the irony? Love the sinner, hate the sin? Gandhi. Gandhi said that.
So, I mean, there's an example of how I said before, secularism has got these competing narratives between religious freedom and hate speech, but even within Christianity, you've got these competing narratives of which bits of scripture do we take more seriously, and tattooing your body and sacrificing animals and
eating pork,
leaving the camp when you've got your period,
mixed cottons.
Yeah, those kind of things have all been acknowledged. So it's interesting.
But that idea of just look after your own shit, and when you're perfect, right? Feel free to have a crack at everybody else.
I mean, the notion of the church being able to say to anybody you're going to hell is overstepping its boundaries, because judgment is a God thing. And what I find fascinating is that Jesus very much reserves judgment for himself and his dad, and when we do see moments when somebody is like exposed to that judgment, like the woman who's caught in adultery,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Then the sin is named, and the woman is exposed, and then Jesus sends her on her way with the instruction to like not do that again.
Oh, it's all the way through, cast the first stone. It's the speck of dust in your neighbour's eye when there's a plank. It's what he says all the way through. And I just love that. I just wonder if forget any kind of religious faith, but if people just took that understanding of just sort your own shit out, and then when you're sorting that out, help others. But until you're basically got all your crap sorted out, just focus on your own crap.
But the problem is that we end up using Jesus and any other religious figure we like as a mascot. We hijack the agenda of what it's really about, and we turn it into being about covering our own fears. And so we've now employed Jesus, who was about good news for all and kingdom of justice and liberation of oppression and those kind of things. And we've now turned him into the champion of a set of morals that happens to line up with my life. Oh, what a surprise! All of the strongest, all the strongest people who advocate this personal morality, which says nothing about wealth, happen to be straight white people with lots of money. Like, I always find it curious that the church has lost its voice of advocacy and has largely become a sort of a self-serving institution, because it's just looking at the bits that do well for those on the inside and dials them up to 11 and leaves the rest of it all unspoken. And so I think there's a real injustice in the portrayal of the Christian gospel, because it's been allowed to, Jesus has been reduced from saviour of creation to champion of a particular set of morals, and morals that some people happen to already subscribe to, in the public view, by the way. And isn't it interesting that, like, if a young Christian reveals that they have homosexual feelings, then that for many churches would be enough to say, well, you're not suitable for leadership and for ministry and for these sorts of things. But if a senior pastor has an affair with somebody in their congregation, or with, there's this, often there'll be a fall from grace, and then there's a way back made for them, because that's a sin we can understand, because we're all red-blooded males too, and we've thought about doing that with our receptionists,
that's why I exclusively work with Jace males.
Right.
That's the only reason.
Yeah. Although that's, given our broader understanding of sexuality and genders now, you're not necessarily safe.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I want to learn about a church, I ask the pastor 3 questions.
Yes.
Right? And this is not because the LGBT issues are the number one issue for me, but I find that those issues pretty much paint a narrative, fairly accurate narrative, one that I can at least get an understanding of the other parts of how that church focuses and functions.
Yeah.
I say to, let's say the pastor who runs a church, or the minister or the reverend or whatever it is, I say, if I had a daughter who was gay, who wanted to be in your youth group, how would the church respond to that? Okay. Probably 4 questions actually. And then I say, if I had a daughter who was gay, who had a girlfriend, who wanted to be an active part of the youth group, how would your church respond to that?
Yeah.
And then I say, if I have a daughter who was gay, and after being in that youth group, she was 19 or 20, and she wanted to lead the youth group, how would your church respond to that? And my final question is, if I had a daughter who was gay, who had been in the church for 5-10 years, had a girlfriend, wanted to get married, and wanted you to marry her, how would the church respond to that?
Yeah.
They're the questions I ask when I want to learn more about a church. Obviously, that's only one issue, but that often speaks to other issues from within that church.
Yeah.
And speaking of,
yes,
it's Easter.
Yes, nearly. We're in Holy Week.
Yeah. And I thought, we've kind of joked before about, oh, Malcolm, if we ever have a gap, you can come and fill in. This really is not one of those things. So I thought, actually, with Easter coming up, I very much respect and like your take on the world, and certainly your take on your faith.
Yes.
And I thought, what do we need to know about Easter? What is Easter in 2019? And other than chocolate eggs, I was talking with someone. My old man's coming down on Thursday to watch the Blues lose. That's the reason he's coming down.
All right.
So on Saturday night, which will be fun.
I hope he gets what he wants.
Well, that's not what he wants. That's what we want.
Yeah.
And someone said to me, "Oh, let's do pizzas on Friday night," and I think, far out. Friday night, Good Friday, when I was a kid in the Catholic Church, was not a night you'd be just going, let's do pizzas. There'd be some pretty serious stuff going on, and I'm just wondering, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but how my life has changed and where it's gone within this weekend compared to my upbringing and stuff.
Yeah. Look, for me, Easter is, I lead a preschool music group at Opaho School on a Friday morning. It's my most regular and well-paid gig as a musician. Everyone pays a gold coin,
and I get to hear the toot going over and over and over again.
Yeah. Sorry about that. That's Sarah, not me. But anyway, I said to everybody as we broke up for the term, for those of you for whom Easter is meaningful, I hope it's a rich time. For those of you who it's a holiday, I hope it's a great time. But there are those two storylines going alongside each other. But I think the church is in danger of losing its distinctive telling of the Easter story because of the society around us. If you look at the stories that we tell and the stories that we value and the films that we make and the books that we write tend towards a happy ending narrative. Yep. The Disney storyline,
Hollywood finish,
where the bad thing that happens is only in the service of making the great thing better. So that the whole story has to hold together, and that means that that Good Friday and Holy Saturday really are only ever kind of preludes towards the great resurrection moment of Sunday. And for me, I think much of human life is lived across that the Friday, Saturday and Sunday of Easter are kind of like metaphors of human existence. And that for many people, we are in moments when life is falling apart around us and the things that we hoped for are being crucified before our eyes, whether that's marriage, a job, a family, a loved one dying of cancer. That crucifixion takes many shapes and forms. And then the next day is that the worst thing has happened to us, and as far as we know, this is now life. This is now normal. And so we are in this dark space and trying to make sense of something that is senseless and meaningless, and trying to get on with life. I think we have to remember, for those disciples, the first time around, Saturday was the first day of the rest of their lives, not just the day while we wait for Jesus to come back, which it now is as we remember the story. And then Sunday, of course, is the unexpected turnaround, and it doesn't come with the way that we celebrated. It comes in the midst of these fearful people. The Luke 24 has the story of the road to Emmaus, where two disciples have heard the rumor of Jesus being raised from the dead, and they are walking out of Jerusalem back home. They're leaving the story of redemption, and they fall in step with a stranger who happens to be Jesus, but they don't recognize him yet. And he turns them around and reveals himself through the breaking of bread and the sharing of communion. And then they run back to Jerusalem. They run back down the road that they just trudged in the daylight. They run back down it in the darkness. It's a metaphor for the transformation that happens in people's lives. And so for me, the holding of those stories together, those 3 days, is really important, because it's about us finding ourselves in the story. This is some of the artwork that came out of the Illustrated Gospel project we did a few years ago. Jace was the designer on the project, and this was a one artwork that a guy in Auckland did on the road to Emmaus. Imagine the instruction that the artists were given was make it look like it belongs in Aotearoa.
Yeah, well, that's very much of, I forget her name, Dame Fenna Cooper. Yeah, that just looks like that.
Yeah, so the idea was like, how do you make it look, how do we create a conversation? Like I said before, way like 100 years ago, art being about starting good conversations and keeping them going. How do we invite people to wonder? I think wonder is a much more useful posture in terms of faith than didactic telling people what to believe. I think inviting people, allowing them to be curious. So for me, art is a really helpful way of doing that, which is what this project was about. But again, that Easter thing, inviting people into a participation in it to find how their story is resonating with God with us, who's Jesus. This is not about how you have to come and leave who you are behind and become someone else. It's how you come and find who you are is actually already a part of the story, and sort of finding out how to move into the next part, or how where you are now is being validated and valued, and that you are not alone in that space. So for me, that's why this experience and this faith has power, because it keeps sustaining me and people like me who are living honestly into it.
There's a church, and as you're talking, I'm trying to rack my brain to think of it, but it's a Baptist church in central Auckland, and they always do like a Stations of the Cross.
Right.
Like the Catholic tradition is the Stations of the Cross.
Yes.
But they always do like an Easter art installation where they do a Stations of the Cross, but it's not your regular Stations of the Cross.
Yeah.
I mean, Jace, if you Googled
is that the Baptist Tabernacle?
No, it's not the Baptist Tab. It's down like Mount Eden Road on the left-hand side. Just if you put Baptist Church Easter art, maybe, or Auckland, it would maybe come up. I mean, just if people want to check it out, because I agree with you. I mean, it's like we were talking about TV when we started up here, and Cityside Baptist. That's the church that it was. Cityside Baptist. That's right. And I find for me certainly the way I get input often is through audible art or visual stuff, and it's certainly something that speaks to me.
What's required by that, though, Pat, is that the church has to stop being the moral watchdog of people's lives, and it has to stop trying to tell people how they have to live, and it has to start inviting them into life and stop pretending to know what that will look like for you or for me, but simply inviting us into conversation with Christ and the scriptures and in worship and in prayer and encounter and community, and then letting stuff happen in that space. And I think art is a way in which that permission can be given, rather than, I know growing up, it always felt like it was about memorizing answers. And then I remember arriving at age 17, 18,
like
being
memory
like,
verses.
I have not necessarily the memory verses, but the notion of, it's just about a set of questions like, who should I sleep with before marriage? No one. How many of the swear words am I allowed to say? None of them. Oh,
that's not true.
Well, that was the line. And so,
the best one, there was a church out in East Auckland called River of Life Elam, and they used to have a do not watch movie list.
Right.
And they'd give it to their youth, and guess what? They were the first movies that the kids were going to watch.
It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As soon as you say you can't
do not
touch
watch, and that was what all the young kids went and watched that weekend.
Yeah, and the church has utterly failed to recognise that if it doesn't work with people's creativity and humanity and curiosity, then it will always be trying to fence people in. And God, I think God invites us to freedom and liberty. So humans are great fence climbers.
Yeah.
If the church is building fences all the time and wondering why people keep climbing out of them, it's because they don't fully understand the God who they apparently are worshipping, which is calling people to. One of the I am statements in John's Gospel, which all the viewers will know about, obviously the 7 I ams. Jesus says, "I am the gate." And people will go and we think, oh, that means he's like, it's the whole no one gets to the Father but through me thing. But actually he says people will come in and go out and find pasture. Like, so there's this notion in which Jesus is the way into embrace and inclusivity and whole life, but also the gate out into freedom, wide open spaces, grace, permission, invitation, wonder, intrigue, fullness. And so it's not about this cloistered kind of keep the world at arm's length thing, but it's about the whole world becoming the gift of God to the people of God, that we are liberated to see it as a sacrament, to be a part of God's story on whichever day of Easter we find ourselves in. So that's why it holds water for me.
Yeah. Cool. We couldn't find the exact thing, but if people are interested in there in Auckland,
I heard of Cityside Baptist.
Cityside Baptist always does something interesting around.
The website was a bit broken
around the time, so just look up Cityside Baptist. And I am endorsing it because I've been along a few times and it was cool. It was always pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
What do you reckon about Damon McKenzie out of the Rugby World Cup?
Is he? I saw him get injured on the.
He's out. Any thoughts?
Stink. Who's that good news for? They'll probably bring in that guy Chase Tier from the Hurricanes.
Or it might be good news for Waisaki, because they were thinking about him missing out. But you know what I thought? And I am gutted for Damien McKenzie. I think, poor guy. But
he's got more World Cups in him.
No, but my big concern with Damien McKenzie was them start to use him as like a second run first five.
Yes.
And he's not up to that standard yet. No. And I just had that visions of whatever it was when they were playing Christian Cullen at centre and thinking, oh God, wrong people in the wrong positions. Goodbye World Cup.
They start to think that they can pop him on the bench to cover wing, 10 and fullback. Yeah. And you start to get nervous about that.
But also it means, I think, because I think he's dynamic at fullback. I love watching him. Yes. But I think it probably solidifies Bender at number 15 now.
Yeah, rather because they kept on pushing him to the wing to make room for McKenzie.
But I think Bender at 15 and obviously Ioane on one wing, and then the other wing I think is still open for grabs. But because you probably need someone to cover both fullback and wing. But they were talking about Waisaki missing out.
Right.
The pundits. So maybe it opens the door.
They've got to talk about something.
They've got to talk about something. Yeah, so gutted for McKenzie, but as you say, plenty more, a couple more World Cups than him yet.
Yeah.
So it's good times. Blues Highlanders this weekend?
Yes. I'm going to be in Wanaka.
Oh, nice. Are you working? Are you church working?
No, holidaying. Yeah. Holy holidays.
Holy holidays. Whānau?
Yes. All of my wife's family, including her sister from London, back, and the sister and brother-in-law from Auckland, and everyone.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, look, thank you for coming, and hopefully you haven't been excommunicated in any way with our conversations.
I'm sure I'll find when I look at my email inbox if it's been very efficient with those sorts of things. Oh, look, I'm out.
And have a great Easter, and thanks for your wise words today.
Have a rich Easter.
Have a rich Easter. Hooroo.